Hi, everyone. I wanted to address a topic that's been going on now recently, and there have been a few videos about this. It has to do basically with when we're talking about the history of the Beatles story. What do we believe? Who do we believe? What's the truth? What's not? I think I've come to the conclusion after really thinking about all of it that we're never going to really know for sure all of it 100%. You have to kind of be a detective, I think, and really take different sources, primary sources, meaning, like, say, in the case of the Beatles themselves and then their entourage, Brian Epstein, George Martin, Neil Aspinall, people that, were affiliated with the Beatles. And you have to also take historians. And I don't think it's really right to rule out either one of these sources because sometimes the Beatles are the best sources of their own history and the number one people to go to because they lived it. Other times, not so. Other times, I think the historians, the Mark Lewisons, I'm trying to think of names, Ray Coleman's, maybe Philip Norman of the world, these people, they can give you information that you don't know. I totally discount Albert Goldman, by the way, and the reason I mainly discount him is he just lied a lot in his book, and he was on a narrative, a mission to really destroy John Lennon and offer up very little positive stuff. And at the time that his book was released back in 1988, I saw a lot of television interviews with a lot of people who knew John, and all of them said the same thing. They said, hey, you know something? He has a section in his book where he thanks me for the interview. And I did not give an interview. I did not consent to an interview. So he's thanking people who weren't even contacted and stuff like that. So, very dubious source, Goldman. But one of the main thrusts of my video that I want to discuss is how the Beatles are not always necessarily the best sources of their history. They make a lot of mistakes, they forget a lot of things, they contradict themselves. John Lennon famously contradicted himself a lot. We talk about the Lennon Remembers interview, aka the Rolling Stone interview with Jan Werner from 1970, and I think a lot of people have rightly pointed out that John was very angry. He was just kind of like trying to conquer all those demons. He wanted to destroy all the myths. So when you're watching the reading the Lennon Remembers book, or listening to the whole interview, which is available on YouTube, the Rolling Stone interview from 70, you have to take it with a pinch of salt because John is basically venting. He's just letting all of the anger and frustrations and hurt and sadness and everything that he's been feeling out. And as a result, I think he went a little too far. There's some truth in it. There's a lot of truth in it, I think. But there's also a lot of myth busting for the sake of myth busting just to try to make a point and to try to denounce people. To be fair to John, I'm a big John fan. Everybody knows that. John's my favorite Beatle, but let's call it like it is. And later on in 1980, in interviews like Playboy, Newsweek, the BBC interview with Andy Peebles on December 6th, the RKO interview, December 8th, the day John died, we hear different things. And John even admits that he lied, at least in one fact, about the collaborations between himself and Paul back in the 1970 interview. So, I mean, what to believe, And you have to realize, too, the Beatles, I'm such a fan and I'm such a collector of interviews. I got tons of interviews right back there in the series on the, you can see some of the spines there, and deeper than that, behind another row, where I hear a lot of contradictions and I hear a lot of mistakes. I mean, I've heard John Lennon say the Beatles' last tour was 65. It wasn't, John. It was 66, Paul always went around saying we had a rule. We wouldn't go to America until we had a number one record there. And when I Want to Hold Your Hand was number one, then we went to America and we took off. That was a very, very good plan, I think. But the only thing is, the Beatles had already been scheduled to go to America before I Want to Hold Your Hand actually topped the chart. So that's a little mixed up. And things like that happen all the time. I mean, I know George had once said to an author, I forget the man's name, I apologize for that. He did a book called Some Fun Tonight, I believe, which is about the live Beatles. And he had said in a talk that I saw him give that George was adamant that they only played Shea Stadium one time. He only remembered the 1965 Shea. Well, George, no, you're wrong. Well, even though you were there and I wasn't there, the fact is I know better than you that you played Shea Stadium twice, once in 65 and 66. It happens, folks. It happens. And some of it's innocent mistakes, misremembering, and not a big deal. Ringo, for example, to this day, I think, and fairly recently in the last few years, talked about the incident that we all know that came up in court, that during the time of the breakup, that Paul McCartney was visited by Ringo. Ringo went to his house to kind of like talk to him about not releasing McCartney, the solo album, and McCartney threw him out of his house and threatened to finish him off. And Ringo says that never happened. Now, if you talk to Ringo next, that never happened. I never went over there and did that. I didn't have. You did. You did. Now, I mean, imagine me telling the Beatles what's right and what's not right, what's true and what's not true. But that does happen from time to time. Let's face it. I have to tell you, I lost a viewer here. For many, many years, I had a viewer on my channel that was one of the best viewers I ever had. If he wants to come forward and speak out, I would appreciate it. He was a guy that I loved getting comments from him. Very bright, very intelligent. He wrote really, lengthy but good, lengthy in a positive way, commentary on things, and I loved reading from him. Always welcomed anything by him. And then one day after many years, we got into a little disagreement about the fact that he was adamant that he's only going to listen to the Beatles, what they say. The Beatles are the only sources that we can really trust. And I tried to bring up points like this. People make mistakes all the time, and it's not really accurate all the time. You can't always go by the Beatles. And because of this back and forth, he never wrote to me again. It happens, but I'm not going to change how I feel. I just wish he'd come back and we could kind of work out a difference there. However, other examples that just popped to mind. I mean, you see, in the Beatles anthology, you see that wonderful bonus footage where you have Paul, George, and Ringo, and George Martin sitting at the mixing console, and they're trying to remember who played the bass on this. I don't know. Did you play? I must have played bass. Did you? I don't know. None of them know who plays the bass on a certain song. They can't remember a lot of times how certain songs came to be. Paul McCartney famously tells a story where he remembers that John Lennon complimented him on the song Here, There, and Everywhere when they were making the movie Help, and that just what couldn't have been possible because Here, There, and Everywhere was released after they'd made Help. Now, I'm sure it happened. I'm sure that John did compliment him and he remembers that, but the time and place gets a little hazy. I don't fault anybody for that. Some people have said, well, maybe Paul was referring to a demo tape or an acetate that John had made or something or like that. No, in Paul's account, he said it was the actual record, the recording, finished recording, if I remember correctly. If I'm not misremembering. So, I mean, it's a mess. One other thing I'll throw up as an example of that, not remembering things or getting things wrong or lying maybe. George Martin, who I love. I love George Martin. Without George Martin, there wouldn't have been the Beatles. I really believe that. I really believe George Martin is the official fifth Beatle. I think he's fantastic. I think he offered so much direction and expertise and keyboards and special effects to their music. He was absolutely essential to the Beatles' popularity and endurance. However, as much as I love George Martin, I have to say, there's a story now that comes out from Mark Lewison, who wrote the book Tune In, about how George Martin had always gone on saying how, well, I signed the Beatles because although the music wasn't really great at first, I found them interesting. So I thought that if I signed them because of the strengths of their personalities, if I love them, if I find them delightful and humorous, I'm sure everybody else will too. So I'll sign the Beatles for that. And that's why I signed them. It was their personality, not so much their music at first. Now, that is not true, as proven by Mark Lewison in his excellent book, Tune In, the first chapter of a three-parter that's going to eventually be coming out. Well, what happens with that is, supposedly now, by talking to Kim Bennett of Ardmore and Beechwood Publishing, we find out that actually they wanted to sign the Beatles, or I should say, first wanted to publish the Beatles because they were songwriters, and they actually had liked on the Decca tapes the song Like Dreamers Do. So the McCartney song. So basically, people say, well, the Decca tapes, Decca turned them down, which is true, but apparently Kim Bennett was interested in securing the publishing when Brian Epstein, the manager, said, well, that's all good and well. I appreciate that. But what the boys are looking for is a recording contract. We'd like to have a contract. And if you sign them as recording artists, then we can give you the publishing. So he agreed to that. And he went over to Len Wood, I believe his name was, Len Wood, over at Parlophone Records. And Parlophone decided that they would stick the Beatles with George Martin, or stick George Martin with the Beatles, properly put. George Martin didn't like what he'd heard. He'd heard the tapes. He didn't think they were really that good at first either, but he had no choice because, as was revealed, there was something going on where George Martin was having an affair with Parlophone secretary, who later became his wife. He wound up he was having an affair with this woman. He wound up becoming his wife. Now, obviously, I don't fault George Martin for not wanting to divulge this, but as time goes on, we find out this is the case. And all these decades, George Martin was telling a story, a wonderful fairy tale story about how, oh, well, it just so happened that I loved the Beatles. They really charmed me, and I thought they're so wonderful that's why I signed them. Well, no, you were forced to sign them. That's a whole story for another video, another book. I often question that too. I wonder why all of these decades, Kim Bennett now comes out and tells the story and so forth. I don't know. It's hard to believe. And how come when the Beatles, which is a topic for another video, when the Beatles finally were signed by Parlophone, and when Ardmore and Beechwood finally did get the rights to the publishing, why did they never ever publish and release Like Dreamers Do, or Love of the Loved, or Hello Little Girl, 3 songs that were on the Decca auditions that they supposedly wanted to begin with? Eventually they got recorded by other artists, but that wasn't right away in 1962. You would think that if that was the truth, that if Kim Bennett was on the money, and if Ardmore and Beechwood had George Martin, pushed George Martin to sign, kind of as a sore point. Supposedly Len Wood was not happy about the George Martin affair. He didn't approve of such things. He was kind of embarrassed. So kind of as a retaliation, or to stick George Martin, he made George Martin take on the chore of having to sign the Beatles, by the way. But if that's the case, and what they wanted was the publishing rights to Love of the Loved or Like Dreamers Do, why didn't they record Like Dreamers Do as their first or second single, the Beatles? Why they never recorded Like Dreamers Do, Love of the Loved, or Hello Little Girl? That's another question. So it's all a mess, folks. I think historians have their place. I think that sometimes primary sources have their place, and they're right and correct 100%. Thank God for them. And they're essential. But other times, historians have spent a lot of years, decades, spent their whole lives studying this stuff from different angles and getting all the information from various sources and coming up with what they think is the best truth they can find. So I think sometimes historians are essential. This business about I don't want somebody else writing the book. Paul McCartney says in his song Early Days, was something like, everyone seems to have their own opinion, who did this and who did that. But as for me, I don't see how they can remember if they weren't where it was at. Well, as I just proven to you, even you guys, the Beatles, can't remember where and don't know where it was at. So I don't know what to tell you, folks. The bottom line is, yeah, I try to use common sense. Sometimes primary sources got it right on the money. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes historians better find the truth by delving in there and studying years and years of facts and paperwork. And they do a better job of capturing the truth, and sometimes they don't either. We'll never know 100%, will we, folks? Well, that's my take on this. Thanks, everybody, for watching.